Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
All right, well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash, and I'm here with Zina, Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the library. This is show number 4, and what we do is we've gone down to the new bookshelf here in the library, and we've gone down to our technical services department where all the new books are being processed, and we've put a whole bunch up to tell you about, and these are books that are probably, you might not know we had or have these kinds of books, and they're not books that you've probably seen the bestseller list, but we do have a wide range of books, both fiction and nonfiction. And so Zina, as usual, is going to go first to tell us about our first book.
Okay, my first book is Winning: The Racing Life of Paul Newman. And this will appeal to all us women who love Paul Newman, just to look at him, and any racing car enthusiasts, of whom I'm told there are many. I don't know much about the sport, but this book attracted my attention because of Paul Newman. And I learned something about racing from this book. It's a mixture of photos and text, lots of pictures, which is good if you're a Paul Newman fan. And it talks about how he started with auto racing. He did a film in, 1969 called Winning. And his co-star was Robert Wagner, and they took professional driving lessons, and that's what started his interest in actually racing. And I'm just going to open the book up and show you some beautiful pictures. Maybe I won't get to the... also, it gives quotes from Paul Newman and tributes from the crew and other racers about Paul Newman, so it covers a wide range of information. This is one quote from Paul Newman that I liked. "I'm not a very graceful person. I was a sloppy skier, a sloppy tennis player, a sloppy football player, and a sloppy dancer with anyone other than Joanne, who was his wife. The only thing I found grace in was racing a car." And he made quite an impression on the racing sport, and he won, I think it says he was the oldest driver to post a class win at the 24 Hours of Daytona. So there's tributes from Bobby Rail, Christian Fittipaldi, and Mario Andretti, who's the only name I know. So something for everyone in this book. Joe?
Okay. Now I feel I should start with this book since I was a little bit late in ordering it. Now, we're filming this on January 22nd, and it's called A Rumpole Christmas. So I was a little behind on this one. But if you know the Rumpole stories by John Mortimer, or so if you remember them on PBS in the 80s, and John Mortimer died last year, if you know the Rumpole books, they're wonderful, they're funny, they're kind of serious. I think if you know the character, Rumpole is like the equivalent of a public defender, and he has contact with a wide range of society in England, and they're very funny and droll, and I've read almost all of them. They're really good. And if you know the Rumpole books, you know that in a lot of the earlier ones, there's always a Christmas story. Most of the books are short stories, 5 or 6. They're like 35 pages each. They're just perfect for a nice evening to sit down and read a nice story. But anyway, this is going to be the last collection of Rumpole. Like I said, John Mortimer just died. This is 5 uncollected stories from magazines, and they're all obviously revolve around Christmas. But it is Rumpole in the court, the old Bailey.
The Old Bailey, that's
and
the court.
A lot of the same characters, and so this is the last Rumpole book, and they're all Christmas stories. A Rumpole Christmas.
That sounds very interesting. I love the shows, the PBS shows,
Yes,
and I've never read anything about it. So,
well, the stories are, if you know the TV, the stories are great.
See, we learned something from each other, us book addicts. My next book is called Death and Enchantment in a New England Ghost Town, Dogtown, by Alyssa East. Now, I had never heard of Dogtown, but it's in our backyard. It's on Cape Ann, between Gloucester and Rockport, Massachusetts, and it's a colonial ghost town, in effect. It's a few square miles of forested land with lots of boulders. One of the reviewers suggested that the landscape looks something like Stonehenge. I'm not quite sure about that. But this is written by Alyssa East, who was attracted or found out about Dogtown through the work of an artist called Marsden Hartley. He's a modernist artist, and apparently he did a lot of paintings of the Dogtown area, and she went to look at Dogtown because of the landscaped art that she saw, and she investigated the history of Dogtown, and the book is a combination memoir. It gives the history of the region, and it talks about a murder that took place in this tract of land in 1984, and she combines it all, and I like murder mystery, so there's a little bit of that too, and it's gotten, the book has gotten really good reviews. So Dogtown, Death and Enchantment in a New England Ghost Town by Alyssa East.
Okay, well, here's a book. Here's an example of one book that we have many, many kinds of, and this is called Coaching Youth Soccer. Step-by-step instruction on strategy, mechanics, drills, and winning. So if your parents are watching out there, sometimes you get roped into coaching and you don't know what to do. So we have books here in our library on how to coach softball. This book is about soccer, basketball, football. We actually, I think, have many DVDs too. But a book like this, and this is only, again, I'm using this as an example, one of many, it has getting started, rules, equipment. I know, for example, my brother once got roped into coaching soccer. He didn't even know the rules. So, so this has rules, player health, warm-up drills, and then it goes into, the basics of soccer. And this book concentrates on 4 to 6 year olds, 7 to 10, 11 to 14, so if you're in any of those youth areas. So anyway, it's got chapters on ball control, passing, dribbling, finishing, heading, set plays, formations, defense, offense, how to run a tryout, what to do on the game day, and simple practices, a lot of drills, and a resource directory, goalkeeping. But again, it's just one example. We have probably a whole 2 or 3 shelves worth of these kind of books on all sports. So if you're a coach out there watching, or like I said, got roped into it, we have a lot of materials here at the library. So this one's Coaching Youth Soccer. And
our viewers might think we planned this, but we don't. This is a really good segue into a book called The Opposite Field, a memoir by Jesse Katz. And Jesse is a Pulitzer Prize winner and a former staffer at the Los Angeles Times and Los Angeles Magazine. And it's a story about the transcendence of baseball that baseball and softball provide. He gets roped into coaching his son's baseball, softball team. See, that's how much I know about sports, whether it's softball or baseball, I don't know. But it's his story of the complexities of running a league, and
but his own son is involved.
His own son is involved.
That makes it.
Yes, but it's a memoir of his life in between. And again, it got really good reviews. And before I pass on to Joe, I'm going to bring up another book that's related to, and I know this is baseball, The Team America Loves to Hate, Why Baseball Fans Despise the New York Yankees. And I want to read this book because I don't know why the rest of America seems to hate the New York Yankees. Let's see. It has, the chapters are, let's see, what it's all about. It's about the players. It's about the system. It's about the fans. It's about a million little things. And then it says, the epilogue is about Yankee love and the new Yankee Stadium. So in our backyard, local interest, the team America loves to hate.
Okay.
So?
Well, here's a book. A lot of times people are asked me and the other librarians here how we choose books. A lot of the books we're talking about on this show and the others are new. And here's an example of why we bought a particular book. It's not a new book. It came out in the 90s, but we recently, if you watch our station, we had a new book review, and we had Professor Tomasz Dvorak from Union College. He taught economics, and he did a noon book review. You may have watched it on our station, of Super Freakonomics. And at the book review, he gave out a little bibliography, and he talked about some books that were just like Freakonomics and Super Freakonomics for the the layman to understand economics. And so if a professor from Union College in the economics department says this is like one of the best books for economics in general for the layman, and so if he recommended, and we didn't own it, I said, well, we're going to buy this. It's called The Armchair Economist, Economics in Everyday Life by Stephen Landsberg, who's a very famous economics teacher. In fact, this book, I was looking at it, it's kind of like Freakonomics, if you know that book. And so this came out in 1993. So this is just one example of why we would order an older book. Again, when he spoke, people came up to me and said, do we have that book? But of the bibliography he gave out, we owned all of them except this one. So we bought this one. And if you're watching, and if you ever notice we don't have a particular book, whether it's new or old, or if it's something you think we should have, like a classic, you can always request it, and if it's available for us to buy, we'll buy it. This book is still in print, so we were able to buy it. So this comes on, highly recommended from an economics teacher at Union College. The Armchair Economist, Economics in Everyday Life by Stephen Landsberg. It's a classic in the field.
And it's certainly timely.
Yeah, yes.
My next two selections are an example of the same topic being handled in two different ways, and I just discovered this by chance. The Fossil Hunter, this is a nonfiction book. The Fossil Hunter by Shelley Emling. It's Dinosaur Evolution and the Woman Whose Discoveries Changed the World. This book, and again, this one is a nonfiction history of Mary Anning, who, when she was 12 years old in 1811, discovered the first dinosaur skeleton in England, on some cliffs in England. And she came from a very poor family, but she became what they're dubbing a fossil hunter, and she made quite a name for herself, and she had a lot to do with the beginning of the science of paleontology. The one thing that's interesting about this is that she and her work, it says, inspired the tongue twister, "She sells seashells by the seashore." Thought that was fascinating, and it's written in a very interesting way. It's very easy to read. She made quite a few discoveries in her lifetime, and even made an impression in the scientific field, even though she wasn't educated. And what I discovered while I was looking at this book and looking at reviews of the book was that this is historical fiction written by Tracy Chevalier, who is a New York Times #1 best-selling author of a couple other books, and this is called Remarkable Creatures, a novel, and it's about Mary Anning as well, and her life, and I guess it emphasizes her personal life as well as her professional life.
It's a novel, though, right?
This is a novel.
Sort of based on her life. Okay.
It's historical fiction.
Okay.
But I looked up, people that are mentioned in the review of this book are actually real people in Mary
and the other one
Anning's
is the
life.
biography. Okay.
This is the biography.
Right.
This is a history. So this is fiction. But what I'm holding up is an audio book of Tracy Chevalier's Remarkable creatures. The book she wrote, I think most people are familiar with, is The Girl with a Pearl Earring. But she wrote a couple other books after that. But this is the audio book, and I suspect I didn't have time to check, but I suspect that we have the book in hard copy as well.
I'm sure we do.
Yes, I'm sure we do. And if we don't, right after this show, we're going to make sure we do. All right. The Fossil Hunter, Mary Anning.
Okay, well, here's a book. For those of you in the radio, if you know the show Democracy Now!, it's on WRPI in the mornings. I think it's on at 9. I'm not 100% sure. And Amy Goodman is the host. And this book is called Breaking the Sound Barrier by Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! It's a collection of her columns. And if you know Amy Goodman's and you know her show, this is sort of news that is usually not in the mainstream press. It's a collection of her columns on these topics: war, climate change, torture, healthcare, the global economic meltdown, media, news from the unreported world. For example, Amy Goodman covered the revolution there is it Timor, the island out in the Pacific. Grassroots activism, elections, Obama, and luminaries. Kind of a long book, but it's a collection of her columns. And in the introduction is written by Bill Moyers, and he says that Amy Goodman has been jailed several times and roughed up, in trying to cover stories. In fact, not just in other countries, in the United States too. So she is quite the person if you ever listen to the show. But anyway, I'll just read you the first 2 sentences of the book, and you get an idea of what Amy Goodman's all about if you don't know her. If you already know her, you probably would want to read this. She says, "My goal as a journalist is to break the sound barrier, to expand the debate, to cut through the static and bring forth voices that are shut out. It is the responsibility of journalists to go where the silence is, to seek out news and people who are ignored, to accurately and clearly report on the issues that the corporate for-profit media often distort, even if they cover them at all." And if I was skimming through this, a lot of these are stories that you may have not have seen in the mainstream press or just peripherally or just mentioned on page B19 or something. So Breaking the Sound Barrier by Amy Goodman, the host of Democracy Now!, the radio show.
Great. Now, I learn something every time I listen to Joe myself. Before I go on, I just want to mention that we do have these books listed in a blog on our library's website, which is colony.org/library, and look for the blog reference. And it's many blogs on many different topics related to books. And one of the blogs is called So Many Books, So Little Time. So if you feel like we've gone too fast and not given, and you want to go back to something we've said, you can find the list of books on our website. The next book I'm talking about is Stephen Cox's The Big House, The Image and Reality of the American Prison. This is a history of the large prisons that were started beginning in the late 1800s, and the first one of the type that Stephen Cox is reporting about was the first one was in Elmira Reformatory, and it says, I'll just read this. The Great Age of the Big House began in 1876 with the opening of New York's Elmira Reformatory, the first really large prison with a total program for the confinement and transformation of inmates. Here the idea of isolating criminals in an enormous cage converged with the idea of reforming them with scientific discipline. And in this book also are many photographs of the what I call unlikely architecture of many of these huge prisons. I think this is written in a very easy to read, engaging way for a history of something that sounds so what shall I say, academic as prisons and the prison system. And it actually, one chapter takes you step by step as if you were the prisoner entering one of these buildings for the first time. And it talks about...
I think it goes into like the culture of the prison.
Right.
Not just the prisoners, but the guards. That book, I read some really good reviews of that book.
Yes.
As,
Good.
Okay, I'm just...
No, that's great. I'm glad you... no, that's great. Let's,
I know I threw you off there. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. It's the contents, how to build a big house. I guess whatever they considered the reasons for building it in a certain way. Your life as a convict, that's the chapter that I was talking about, where it takes you step by step what it would feel like to go into the prison. And chapter 4 is the art of humiliation. And I read one little interesting thing about the origin of the prison's uniforms and the stripes on the prison uniforms, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to make you go read the book. No, I'm going to make you go read the book. The Big House, the image and the reality of the American prison.
Okay, now, I just talked about Amy Goodman's book. Now, Amy Goodman would probably not like the person that this book is about, but I'm going to follow with. But, you know, as a library, we have books on all kinds of subjects. Last year, I read a book by Jeffrey Toobin called The Nine about the Supreme Court, and whether you're liberal or conservative or Democrat or Republican or whatever your judicial philosophy is, all the Supreme Court justices they're fascinating characters. I shouldn't say characters. They're fascinating people, very complex. And in the Nine, he talks about all of them, and he interviews all of them. And one of the persons who comes off as a very interesting guy, and I've read some magazine articles about him, and I've seen him on TV, a really fascinating guy. He is Supreme Court Justice Anton Scalia, and this is a new biography of him called American Original: The Life and Constitution of Supreme Court Justice Anton Scalia. And if you don't know anything about him, he really is a character. I mean,
he's not a shrinking violet. He's not a shrinking violet.
In the case of character, he is a character, but I've read a lot about him, and this book got really good reviews, even from some very liberal journals, I guess you could say. The author is Joan Biskupic, and I haven't read it, but it did receive many, many good reviews, and it's called American Original: The Life and Constitution of Supreme Court Justice Anton Scalia. So. Okay.
And my next book is quite a departure from that. This is a self-help book. It's a reissue of a book that was published 20 years ago, and it was a bestseller. And this is called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers, Dr. Susan Jeffers. And I think that I never had heard of this book, and it doesn't look like we haven't had it in the collection. Maybe we did and it was lost or something like that. But she's a psychotherapist, and the point of it is to identify the fears that are inhibiting one's life, ranging from public speaking to other things, and learning how to get beyond that fear. And I like this one thing. It says the secret of making no-lose decisions. And how to stop the negative chatterbox that's in your head. This is something that I used in my parenting, I'll say skills, to try to teach my kids that, and myself, by the way, because public speaking has not been my forte. The idea...
Unless we do the show live, then it'll be...
Anyway, here we go. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Is that fear is natural, feeling butterflies and sweaty palms, and just do it anyway. And one of the only ways to get through the fear is to actually do what you're afraid of. Now, that doesn't mean jumping off a cliff, in case there's any children watching, but it says 5 truths about fear. The fear will never go away as long as I continue to grow, meaning that if you keep trying new things in life, there's always things, those new things will always be a little scary. The one thing that I thought was true for me was that pushing through fear is less frightening than living with the underlying fear that comes from a feeling of helplessness. And that's something in my life, and I try to teach my kids this as well. Okay, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Okay, well, it would be different if we did the show live, Zina, I think. And that's an example. One of the highest circulating categories in our library, and one of the biggest actually, are those self-help books.
Yes.
We live in the age of, I forgot the sociologist said, the therapeutic culture or something we live in now.
Well, I prefer to think of it as people wanting to make themselves better.
Okay, here's an example. I've been a librarian for 22 years, I think, 22 or 3. And one of the most common questions we've received, and one of the most popular books, and one of the reasons people come to the library a lot, maybe not in the internet days as much, but they still do, for collectibles, the value of things. Here's 2 examples. I mean, these are for record albums and 45s and albums. This one's 1,300 pages, bigger than a phone book. It's the Goldmine American Records 1950 to 1975. This is the Goldmine Record Album Price Guide. And the text is very small, but it has probably every record, all genres, jazz, pop, rock, spoken word. There's even a section here if you have any old Rod McEwen album. Rod McEwen's in here. Remember that guy?
I sure do.
But anyway, it gives the value of records. So if you have a lot of record albums at home, and some of them are worth a lot of money, particularly if you have somebody like Elvis or first pressings of the Beatles, and etc. So this is just 2 examples, and this is just the records. We have probably 5 or 6 shelves upstairs in the library of all different kinds of collectibles and the value. Very common question here in the library. So it's just 2 examples. Zina?
Okay. I'm just going to highlight this book called The Internet for Dummies. I don't think that you could be a bookstore browser or know anything about books or read books without being aware of the For Dummies series. There's 4 dummies on almost every topic you can imagine. I just looked in the back of this book and it says Refractor Telescope for Dummies. But this book I find really useful for breaking down into small, useful bits of information, a topic that you might not be familiar with. This is the 2010 edition of the Internet for Dummies. We have many of the older editions of this, and the Internet and the World Wide Web change every day, and so it's important that we keep up with all those changes. And I looked at this and found all sorts of things that were new to me, and I teach a beginning Internet World Wide Web class, and there's information about blogs and Twitter. It compares browsers, the Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari, one of which I didn't know about. And so I just want to bring to your attention that these books are in our library, particularly with the computer topics. These For Dummies books are very useful. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, here's a book. I love the title of this book. It is called Why Italians Love to Talk About Food by Ilana Kostiakovich. I think she might be Russian. No, I'm sorry, she's not Russian, she's Italian. But anyway.
It sounds Russian, though.
It does. I'm sorry, you know what? She's a Russian translator. She translates books into Russian. But anyway, this book was written in Italian, so this book is the real deal. And it's called Why Italians Love to Talk About Food, and it's hard to say what this book is. It's sort of a cookbook, but it really isn't. It's sort of a travel book, but it really isn't. It's sort of a history book, but it really isn't. And it's sort of a philosophy book, but it really isn't, obviously. But this is a book of little essays on all kinds of subjects have to do with Italy and food. There's a little essay on the main regions. I think there's 18 regions of Italy. So there's a little thing there. It's part, like I say, part history, part travel, all to do with food. And there's little essays on food and other things. Like there's a little chapter on olive oil. There's a little chapter called Slow Food. There's a chapter on risotto. There's a thing on pizza. There's a chapter on just called Ingredients. There's one called Democracy. There's one called Eros. So it covers a wide range here to do with food. And I was looking through it. It's really a fascinating book. It's, like I say, what I just said about it, it seems to cover everything about food and its importance to the Italian culture. And I think you can extrapolate to all cultures, and it's really fascinating. And it was written by the woman who translates Umberto Eco's novels. Is that the guy's name?
Yeah, that sounds right to
He writes
me.
these long,
Umberto.
Yeah, but anyway, it's the subtitle is A Journey Through Italy's Great Regional Cuisines from the Alps to Sicily. But like I say, it's more than a cookbook and more than a travel book and a history book. But it's a little of everything. It looks totally fascinating.
What's it being classified in?
It is up there with the cookbooks.
Okay.
But up with the cookbooks, there are also books on the history of food. But this is about food and culture and society, and it just looks very interesting. So.
It does. My next book is somewhat related, Herbal Medicine of the American Southwest, the definitive guide. It says medicinal and edible plants, collection, preparation, use, and cautions by Charles W. Kane. And then there's a reference to a Frank Rose paintings by, because there's a section in there, in here, of paintings of some of these herbs and plants. This was originally published 4 years ago. It's updated now, although the author says that there aren't that many changes being made. He says that he was pleasantly surprised by the popularity of his first book, and he thinks that herbal medicine has now gone mainstream. Now, this is herbal medicine of the Southwest, but there are plants in here that can be found in the East, and there are many beautiful photographs and as well paintings. Let me see if I can, yes, this is a painting. Sometimes you can't tell if it's a painting or a photograph. And it's written very clearly, presented very clearly, all sorts of technical information, but it also tells you how to use the herbs and for what purposes, and it also gives cautions for each herb as well. So, Herbal Medicine of the American Southwest.
Okay, we have time for one more, and my one is actually four, but they're all the same. They're all the same topic. I didn't know that this was such a hot topic, or that it was so popular until I started ordering these books, because we had so many requests for them. And if people would put in requests for subjects, we can certainly try to meet them. And this is making your own jewelry with beads and beading. And here's 4 books. I'll just read the titles quick and just tell you about them. It's how to do make your own jewelry using beads. Here's one called the Illustrated Bead Bible, Terms, Tips, and Techniques. All you need to know about making, these wonderful pictures in here in all these books. Bead and wire jewelry exposed. 50 designer projects. Hopefully you can see that, but it's really amazing what you can do with these little beads and a string and one of those little plier thingies, and really amazing. And this is all different. The beader's color palette. 20 creative projects, 220 inspired combinations for beaded and gemstone jewelry. Again, it's a how-to, how to do different colors, how to do different techniques. Here's some very elaborate stuff. This looks Southwest, like the book you just had. And here's one if you want to combine beading and knitting. It's called Knit 1, Bead 2. Apparently when you knit, you can put little beads in it. I did not know that, but here's a whole book on doing these little beading while you're knitting, and I guess you put the beads in the, right while you're knitting it. So this has been very popular lately. I think I've ordered about 10 of these books lately, but the reason we ordered them is they were generated by people requesting them. They were all new. So if there's new books out there you've heard about, and we don't have it at our library, you can just fill out a little reserve and we'll probably get it. Now, do you have time for one more, Zina?
Well, I'll just
Yes, do that last one.
I like this one. Fromer's 500 Places to Take Your Kids Before They Grow Up. And I just want to say that I really like this book. It's not just for kids. In fact, some of the places they mention, I'm not so sure kids would be interested in. But there's they don't have it arranged by, for the most part, by geography. They have it arranged a little bit differently. Awesome vistas, exploring the scenery, weird and wonderful, walk with the animals, positively medieval, war and peace, which I thought was very interesting, for budding scientists, holy places, historic homes, out and about. So if your child is interested in science or museums, if your child is interested in medieval stuff, this kind of categorize the sites of the world. But I find it totally appropriate for adults. I don't know why they put kids in here, just kids. Maybe just for that reason, because of its subject categories, but it has like 7 public transportation systems to see. It uses the gondolas of Venice, the canal boats of Amsterdam, the trams of Marseille, the Tokyo monorail, the Wellington cable car in New Zealand, New Orleans streetcars, and this is an unusual, cable cars of San Francisco. But there's other things like that. The seven super ships, 7 best beaches, 500 places to take your kids before they grow up by Frommer's. Okay, Joe?
Well, we actually may have got to 30 this time. Well, thanks for watching. So many books, so little time, and I think we're going to be filming this once a month or so, and we'll see you next time.